Okay, so I'm going to bring the meeting to order, and by way of a roll call, I will just call out Sharon Abreu. Are
Here.
you here? Excellent. Kevin Ranker.
I'm here.
Okay, and Kyle Davies.
Here, from here down.
Okay, that's not good enough. You're going to have to go and come back when you're
Okay, here.
half your brains. Okay, welcome everybody, and definitely we also welcome Judge Katie. She allowed us to call her, and Linnea, and look forward to their presentations very much. We've been eager to have those, and they kindly shared their bios, by the way, just so you know, which we can upload if they don't mind onto our CRC site, so that we can share those with folks so they have an idea of these esteemed public servants in our midst today. So just by way of, I did give Linnea and Judge Loring a notification that we would just do a little bit of housekeeping business, so to speak, or a little bit of meeting business for a couple minutes, get that out of the way, and then proceed with their presentation or their presentation. So if everybody's in agreement with that, I'd like to proceed that way. And I trust you all at least have the agenda or have glanced at it. Just vis-a-vis the minutes of last week for our March 8th meeting, I wanted to suggest that we defer approval of those until next week, because I wanted to make the suggestion that Sharon perhaps tighten those up for us a little bit in terms of more bullet pointing key topics discussed under each of the agenda items. And so if everybody's okay with Sharon just doing just a little tightening up of those minutes, and so they're more a reflection of the issues discussed under each item, that would be my preference. If anybody has an alternate view to that, how do you feel about that, everyone? Kyle, you're okay? Sharon, I think you're okay. Okay, Kevin, you all right with that? Okay, I think we're going to assume he's okay.
Yes, I am.
Okay, good. Sharon, thank you so much for taking those minutes, because they were a really good capture for us. So really appreciate it. In terms of approval of agenda, I just wanted to make sure that what I've lined up here for us today makes sense, with the caveat that we want to give as much time as we feel is needed to our presenters today, so that they can share with us the information they feel is important to our work, and we can ask them questions. And then following that, we would have a brief discussion of items that we have been discussing previously, as much as we have time, which won't be a lot, but we'll touch on them anyway. We could quickly take stock of the review list of guest speakers I've compiled in a table for you that I shared with you before the meeting. And I can walk you through it if you don't have it in front of you, and that's okay. Just to add any names, to confirm we want to try and get dates. We'll have a moment for new business, a few minutes for new business towards the end. Any additional items you want to put on the table for further deliberation in forthcoming meetings. We'll let any public comments be made for a few minutes, and then we'll adjourn. Does that seem a reasonable attempt at coverage today?
Yes.
Okay. The only other thing I wanted to offer up prior to diving into the presentations rather, is just a quick check-in on this suggestion of a sort of a work progress or process worksheet, spreadsheet. And I sent it all to you. I sent it to all of you, unfortunately, this morning, very late. And it's a simple spreadsheet for how we're going to track our deliberation of the various issues that have been put forward to our group. And so you don't need to give me the okay on it now. You can give me the okay on it perhaps in an email after the meeting, after you've had a chance to look at this sort of work process spreadsheet. The purpose of it is really to capture the issues that have been assigned to us, reflect how we've discussed those or considered those issues, and indicate how we've come to a decision on those based on our discussion. And make reference to any reference documents we referred to in deliberating those issues, any people we spoke with, any stakeholders we talked to regarding those issues, and sort of the date on which we concluded on those matters and decided we would refer them to the bigger commission or explain to the larger commission why we weren't going to carry them forward. So it's just really a bit of a process worksheet for us to organize ourselves. And we, you can maybe just give me an email response so we all have an idea if we're in agreement with that. Any comments on it at this stage, or do you want to just look at it?
What's the column for consulted?
Consulted. Sorry, consulted is who did we talk to? If we talked to anybody about it. So yeah, if there's, because we've got a number of issues there, right? So for some of them, we're maybe talking to more specific people than others, or some we may not feel we need to consult on because we've decided another way to deal with that issue, maybe building it into another, and we've talked about that before, Kyle, is it maybe, maybe we want to sort of bridge some of these issues together, right? So if we did deeper consultations with some stakeholders for some of these topics, just to reflect that, that we were informed by so-and-so, or that we referenced such and such documents, we might have consulted with the MRSC for some additional information, so on, and that kind of thing, if that makes sense.
It does, and I can take this offline with you. Certainly, we have talked too about, at some point, whatever sort of decision or sort of final plank that we have that's topic oriented, we'll need to kind of pass a Randy smell test or some. So I wondered if that's what you meant by consulted. There's probably another column or two for that kind of stuff, but I appreciate you making this endeavor, and I think it'll help us stay organized. It does show how many things we haven't gotten to yet, so which is part of the point, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So if you guys feel we need an additional column or two, just because it makes sense to add one or two, no problem at all. I just threw it out there as a work tool that I thought might help us go from minutes that Sharon takes to sort of recording things a bit more, so we have some kind of, rather than trying to dive back into multiple minutes and like, what did we talk about? And so and we can discuss how we want to populate it. It could be that we the chair populates it after each meeting or something, and then we run it past each other in the next meeting. I don't know. I know I'm introducing at the 11th hour, literally this morning, a tool so we can just play. I could even play with it after this meeting and send a draft that has some stuff in it and see how you guys think about it. If that, Sharon, does that, Kyle? That seem okay?
Let's remember to do content on top of structure. That's all I would say. It helps to get organized for sure, and I like it, and I think it's an inevitable place we needed to go better sooner than later. I know your time and my time, or all of our times are slim. So
I hear you.
Thank you for doing that. Okay.
Yeah, sure. Okay, no problem. So with that, if there's no other questions regarding or comments regarding the agenda at this stage, shall we? Can I just ask if there are, and if they're not, we can move into the presentations.
Not for me.
Okay, Sharon, you're good? Okay, and Kevin?
Excited to move forward into the presentation.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so at this happy moment, I'm going to refer to our dear colleagues, our steadfast public servants who we deeply appreciate and respect, to share with us what it is their important branch of our county government does and give us a little 101 on your day-to-day, on your offices, and and how you fit into our county's government. That would be most welcome. And over to you.
Great. Well, thank you for having us. So I'm Judge Loring. I'm happy to have you refer to me as Katie, Judge, any combination. I'm not about formality, so I'm happy to have any title. And Linnea and I'll let Linnea introduce herself, but we are prepared to do a joint presentation. We work really well together. We've done different joint presentations, so that's our goal. And we really are focusing on specifically race and equity within what we're doing, what Superior Court, which includes juvenile court, is doing for San Juan County, and then broader in terms of state efforts. So we certainly can't speak for district court or the clerk's office, but we do collaborate a lot, and we'll point out those points of collaboration, where they apply. But I just want to be really clear that we will make an effort to talk about the branch as a whole, but we can't speak for district court or the clerk's office, and we can get into that. But Linnea, I don't mean to speak for you either, so you go ahead.
Well, thank you, Judge. I'm Linnea Anderson, and I serve as your Juvenile Court Services Administrator, and I wear a few extra hats too. And I'm also inquiring if I may have permission to share my screen. We have a PowerPoint to aid us, keep us on track.
Excellent. Now, can you, Linnea, are you able to do it just remotely on your own?
I am. I just wanted to ask first.
By all means, yes. Please go ahead.
So Kevin, I'm assuming you won't be able to see the PowerPoint, or am I wrong about that?
No, just because I was the sponsor of the no cell phone and driving law doesn't mean I'm obeying it.
All right, you don't have to disclose anything else. I just wanted to say that we'll share it.
Thank you, Judge.
So if you want it in the future, we'll share it.
All right. Okay, Judge, I have set it where I can't see anyone's face, so I will need some visual cues from you. So when you're ready for me to move forward,
great. So we are here, Linnea and I, together representing Superior Court. You have our bios, which are, the formal, fancy bios. Obviously, if you have any questions about us as we go, please ask them, but I don't feel like we need to belabor that part. Just know that we are serving San Juan County together in Superior Court. So this is the Superior Court org chart, and don't want to belabor it, but just want to point out kind of how small and mighty we are. And this is a message I'm sure you're hearing throughout San Juan County, because we all wear lots of hats. That's just a function of our small county. But so I'm the only Superior Court judge. I also serve as drug court judge and juvenile court judge. And Jane Severin, who I think is here observing, is our Superior Court administrator. She does everything in order to make sure that our court functions and operates and can do what we need to do. We've had a part-time assistant. You see that down in the bottom corner, it's vacant. Due to budget constraints, we don't have that right now. We also got some CARES funding to have a courthouse monitor, just point that out. So that person is serving some COVID duties, but it's very temporary, only through April right now. Also plant a seed. It's not about what we're talking about today, but we don't have any dedicated courthouse security for the courthouse. Just important for you all to know. We worked really hard to get some funding for courthouse security to have one dedicated position. We did that, got it funded for 2020, but then weren't able to hire. We were in the process and COVID happened. And now my understanding is those funds have been redirected and aren't part of any current budget. So that's an ongoing issue. Just want to plant that seed. And then drug court case manager is Brad Fincher, who's actually district court probation officer. But again, we share resources, and so he helps do our drug court with us. You're good to go, Linnea.
Okay, great. Thanks, Judge. So this is the Juvenile Court Services Division, and I'm sure Judge Loring will go into it a little bit more in depth, but Juvenile Court Services is not a constitutional separate court. We are a division of the Superior Court. And so I serve as the administrator, and I have an incredible staff team. As that theme kind of reverberates through, we have very limited resources, and we all wear a lot of hats. But the main thing is that our department culture is our most valuable asset. We focus on being safe, inclusive, supportive, collaborative. We're flexible, and we have very clear expectations of one another.
So thinking about what the Superior Court mission is, I'll let you read the details there, but substantively, we're trying to provide substantive justice. And by that, I mean providing impartial, equal, fair, and accessible justice to all people who come before the court in any way, regardless of any status. In doing so, we also want to make sure there's procedural justice. And so the procedural justice component is trying to ensure that everyone feels respected, feels heard, and understands the result, and that therefore they can accept that result. Hopefully, that's the goal. And we'll talk more about procedural fairness as we go forward. So what does Superior Court do? We have Superior Court, we have a district court here in San Juan County. Superior Court is considered a court of general jurisdiction created by the Constitution, which means that the court can hear almost any case type, but the court also has exclusive jurisdiction over certain types of cases. And juvenile court is part of Superior Court. So that's what Linnea said when she said it's not a constitutionally separate court. We talk about it separately sometimes, but it's part of Superior Court. So the most common cases that Superior Court handles is prosecution of serious crimes, felony crimes, and family law cases, and all the kinds of cases that go into family law. But also the juvenile, what we think of as juvenile court cases include dependencies. That's where the state has gotten involved because there's suspected abuse or neglect of children. And then also either criminal offenders, or there's several different kinds of civil prevention. I think of them as prevention types of cases within the juvenile arena. And then sort of every other kind of civil dispute you can imagine, as well as probate, trust, guardianship, those kinds of cases.
Well, and in juvenile courts, our division, I talked a little bit before that we supervise 4 distinct program areas. Our capstone, of course, is juvenile court services. But really with all of the work that we do, our volunteer guardian ad litem program that supervises all the volunteers that advocate on behalf of those children who have been removed from their homes due to suspected abuse or neglect. We supervise and direct the public defender screening program, as well as the courthouse facilitator program that's supporting self-represented individuals going through family law cases. But the one thing that kind of we all work together is that we make sure that we promote access to justice through respectful service. So each program area has its own mission, which is really what we're focused on every day in our lanes. But we do have some connecting. We definitely connect, and we also believe in no wrong door. So what does juvenile court services do? We do a lot of things. There's not that many of us, so we work very closely on teamwork. There are many activities and multiple disciplines, and we put people first. That's really our focus. And I talked for a second about that no wrong door. We work very hard to support each other and to back each other up, not only just to create an inclusive environment of support and collaboration, but also for all of our residents. All of our services, just because I'm on vacation today, shouldn't mean that the services that I provide should stop, because people need access to the court and need access to our services. So we cross-train and support each other through all of these general activities.
So now we're going to shift and talk about what we understand is one of the things you all are focusing on, and certainly is a passion of ours, and that's specifically efforts to reduce structural or systemic racism within the justice system. So this is a quote, and it's a long quote from a letter by the Washington Supreme Court. I'm not going to read it to you right now, but I'm sure you all know that in June, following the killing of George Floyd, our Washington Supreme Court acted swiftly and strongly, and really as a leader, being the first state Supreme Court in the nation to issue a call to action. And that call to action recognized on its face expressly the role that the legal community and the courts in particular have played in legitimizing and furthering racism in the justice system. And that was really important for them to name and own, and then call the legal community and the courts to action. And how are we going to help solve this problem? Because we have to act, and it has to be tangible action, not just more talk. And so that letter also triggered other groups, including the Superior Court Judges Association, then to act and to ask every committee within the Superior Court judges, these are statewide committees handling different areas of law and different issues, asked each committee to identify what are you going to do in the coming year to tangibly, appreciably affect and reduce systemic racism. So it's a really great leadership, and we're so fortunate to have this. So there's a huge list here, and that's why I asked if Kevin could see it all, the PowerPoint, because we didn't want to read off every single thing that we're doing, but there are a number of efforts going on statewide, and then we're also going to talk about locally. And so Linnea and I each serve on many different committees statewide, and that statewide work is so important. It helps inform what we're doing locally, but it also helps connect us to the rest of the statewide system, and to hopefully by doing so, build support for that systemic change that is so needed. We can make really great efforts here locally, and we do when we want to, but to have that really effective change, we need to be part of the statewide effort. And so Linnea and I each work really hard in a variety of ways to work at the statewide level to then help what we're doing at the local level. So I just want to hit a couple of these. I'm super excited, and you may all know, but you may all not know, that this Friday, the state is launching a racial justice consortium. It's really the first of its kind in terms of, at least for our state, and every different component of the justice system, the judicial branch, is represented on this committee. You know, all of the clerks associations, the administrator associations, limited jurisdiction courts, superior courts, court of appeals, everyone, interpreter commission, everyone has a seat at this table. And there's been a real effort made to have a really diverse group of people. I mean, just so exciting. We've had at least one planning meeting so far, and just such a diverse community being represented there. And so there was fundraising done. Initially, the goal was something like $125,000. They've raised over $200,000. They were able to hire a staff person for over a year to help facilitate this work at the statewide level, to analyze our procedures, our practices, and education that needs to be done, and figure out how are we going to make that effective, appreciable change going forward. So that's really exciting. I also serve on a couple of different committees. One of those, the Rural Courts Committee, is hosting a webinar coming up on March 31st, talking about the importance of belonging, specifically for rural courts, and how we can create spaces and courts of belonging so that people feel part of that rather than an outsider coming into someone else's justice system. So another really exciting initiative.
Thanks, Judge. It is a lot of exciting work happening all around the state. And just to add, you know, the other part about ensuring that we have a seat at these tables is it makes sure that the small county voice is represented. And there's something really nice about being a small court or a small county at these big tables, because so many of our colleagues are very removed from the direct work. But that's one of the benefits about being in a small community, is you may be in a high leadership position, but you're still closely close to the work. And so we're able to bring that perspective as we go into the planning meetings, that I think is so helpful. And the other piece with the statewide work is part of my big effort is to ensure that I'm bringing resources back to the community, like the Race and Equity Justice Initiative toolkits and things like that. I serve on multiple strategic and education committees, and through that, I get a lot of information and are able to bring that learning and those resources back to provide for our entire community.
So we're also doing a lot locally, and it's important to mention, you know, not to totally toot our own horns, but I think we need to, that Linnea and I, and Linnea in juvenile court especially, have been doing this work for a long time. So it's, I mean, I know that there's a great emphasis on this now in the last year, and that's really important. And I hope that this moment in time allows change to happen. But we have been working on this, and Linnea and juvenile court especially have been working on race equity issues for a long time, which is just awesome. So just a few examples of local efforts here. I helped bring an implicit bias training to all court staff this past winter. And we sometimes forget, you know, lawyers and judges and court administrators to some degree get a lot of trainings. We're really fortunate that we get a lot of trainings, but staff don't always get those trainings. And so being able to have an implicit bias training for all staff, you know, clerk's office, prosecutor staff, everyone, was really awesome. Also, we have started and are continuing to have these conversations in our Law and Justice Council. The Law and Justice Council is something created and required by statute that includes our prosecutor's office, our public defender's office, sheriff's office, a member of county council, and then of course the courts and administrators and clerk. And so we meet, right now we're meeting quarterly, but we meet regularly, and I've just asked us to keep putting this on the agenda and talk about what changes can we make, what data can we be collecting to analyze ourselves, what other conversations do we need to be having.
That's great, Judge. Thank you. You know, I really appreciate you bringing that up. We started translating juvenile court forms, our most commonly used forms, to have Spanish and English inclusion and ready to go at any time. Since I think 2012, we started that forms translation process. So we've been dedicated to making micro changes all the way to macro changes. When I came on and promoted in 2016, that has been a regular part of my annual mission every year, is to really look at other ways that we can increase our inclusion. For instance, this year, we're challenging ourselves as a department to just really increase our gender inclusion, looking at our forms and other written materials to reduce language that may be exclusionary. The other thing is our graduated behavior assessment. That's something I'm so proud of. The entire team worked on this, and this has been an incredible tool and a labor of love. It took a long time to get to where we could launch it, but we launched it at the beginning of 2020, and it has been incredible. So we look at young people's behavior on a regular basis, as you would imagine, in juvenile court on our offender and non-offender sides. And we have to make a lot of decisions. Our staff have to make decisions. We all are making decisions. And a lot of times it's because we're taking in some information. Someone just called really upset about this kid who did this thing that's so whatever. And then we have this emotional response and we're called to make a decision. The graduated behavior assessment challenges all of the staff to pause, to breathe, and to think logically and linearly about the entire case before making that decision. And we have been noticing, we've been collecting and just paying attention to what our decision would have been in the moment. We've been careful to make the decision in the moment and then to do the graduated behavioral assessment to see if it's different. And it's 100% different every time. So that tells us that it's really working to reduce that bias, to reduce the emotionality in decision-making, and really come to the table with a more logical perspective as we're presenting information on our decision-making process. The other thing I will just say is our staff in juvenile court services is incredible. They are all committed to a growth mindset. They're super curious and they're dedicated to learning. And they've created a staff reading list and they've created a learning community just on their own to really step up their learning and sharing specifically around structural racism this year. It's been really exciting.
So thinking specifically about procedural fairness, which is something that Linnea and Juvenile Court is passionate about, it's something that I'm passionate about too. This slide has all of the components of that, but I guess how I would break this down is that procedural fairness is really about being a human being ourselves and recognizing the humanity in every person who comes before us or who interacts with the justice system. I mean, to me, that's just the fundamental principle, is that we can't, in these roles, lose sight of the humanity in every single person. And so speaking with people in a way that meets them where they are, that respects them, that lets them ask questions, that shows that we're unbiased, and then really seeks to make sure someone understands the decision that's being entered. And from my perspective, especially as judge, that's so important, because people, and still it's hard to know for sure that they do, because it's so stressful, especially if someone's coming from a trauma background. It's so stressful being in these places, but trying to really genuinely ask to make sure people have the time to think and ask questions about the decision being made. And hopefully in doing so, if people feel like they've been heard and understand the decision, hopefully they're more accepting of that ultimate decision. So these are just a few highlights. So Linnea and I both, and our staffs, as Linnea has said, and I too, we have wonderful, amazing staffs, and it's so important to all of us. You know, Jane is always working behind the scenes, but she too is passionate about access to justice. And we have to be careful to think about, you know, access to justice is one thing, but really what is meaningful access to justice? And so that's what we've been working hard, and it's our continuing goal, is to look at what other ways, what other things can we do to reduce barriers to meaningful access to justice. So just to hit a couple of highlights, One is legal financial obligations. The courts for the past 5+ years really have recognized that legal financial obligations, which are fines and fees people owe after being convicted of a crime, that those legal debts just hold people back, or can hold people back after they've finished whatever sentence they might have had to serve related to a criminal conviction, even after they've done their community custody or probation. If they still have those fines and fees, those can really hold people back in terms of, can impact ability to have a driver's license, can impact your ability sometimes for employment, can impact your ability to rent an apartment. And so the court started recognizing that, and the courts required that judges issuing those fines and fees make findings about people's ability to pay and indigency. And then the legislature really built on that in 2018. And then the legislature made sweeping reforms so that there are very few things that the court has to impose. And for any of the discretionary things, the court has to make findings that people essentially have financial ability, that they are indigent, in order to require those fines and fees. And so here in San Juan County, Superior Court, District Court, and Juvenile Court, we work together to create user-friendly forms to allow people to come back in after the fact. So let's say I got convicted 5-10 years ago, to come back in now and ask to have those fines or fees reduced or remitted altogether. So to really help get people that clean slate and let them move forward, knowing that they've served their time and have a right to move forward and build their lives. So there are some exceptions to that. Restitution can't be waived, for example, but in general, most of the fines and fees can be either remitted completely or very much reduced. We also are continuing to work on interpreting, translating forms, making sure that there are interpreters in any environment needed related to the court proceeding. And then we also were able to refund our position for helping self-represented litigants through the courthouse facilitator program. So I guess plant these seeds, and then we can answer questions about any of these programs. So we'll kind of take your lead on where your questions lie.
Yeah, thank you so much for letting us share our work with you. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen unless you want to see a different slide, or we can always go back to that.
Thank you, Linnea, for running the PowerPoint. You do that very seamlessly.
Thank you very much. That was excellent. Yeah, I really appreciate it. There's a lot there. There's a heck of a lot there, a lot going on. And it was sort of like feels like a little, just a taste of what's happening in your office. So I'd like to ask Sharon and Kyle and Kevin if they have some questions off the top for the judge and for Linnea.
I do, if no one else does.
Go ahead, Kyle.
I had a number of them, and you answered each one of them with a subsequent slide, which I appreciate. I don't want to presume the answer here, but what makes it, in your minds, possible for your office to be successful with this? Not only to challenge some of the notions and to think ahead and to challenge yourselves, but to take action, or maybe in the reverse. What allows you to take action, some of which is sort of trickle down, but to go further? And I mean, an employee-driven reading list, that's fabulous, and I think we'd be much further along, and we'd probably have a lot less work, the four of us and the bigger commission, if there was more energy around this, or if more of the county had and I don't want to answer my own question. I'd like to hear from you. How do we pass this success story into other dimensions of government? Not especially here, specifically here.
Linnea, do you want to go first? Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I've got lots of ideas. So that's part of it, is I come with an equity lens from my background. So it's something that's really important to me. So I'm going to go backwards. So part of it is, this is something that is a priority. This is not something that I give lip service to. This is not something that is on a document. This is something that is alive within our department. And we talk about it at our staff meetings, at our retreats, in our work. We're constantly dedicated to this continuous quality improvement around these subjects. We are a very curious bunch, so we're constantly digesting information and research. I serve on all these committees at the statewide level, so I get exposed to strategy and information that really is compelling as to how we can move forward. It's not just something that crushes us where it seems so overwhelming that we can't make any forward progress. So I get a roadmap and I get to bring that back. And then I think lastly, there are certain RCWs that require it in juvenile court. We must consider a child's age and development and other things in their life when we're making decisions. We must file a plan to reduce our racial and ethnic disparities. So there's structure there that says we have to do this. And then there's the other piece that we have leaders who are installed that say, this is the right thing to do, and we are committed to doing this, and we're going to hire people who are committed to this.
Yeah, I echo everything Linnea said, which usually goes without saying, but I would also start where she left off, that I think electing people and hiring people that are passionate about this is the best way to move it forward. It's a passion of mine too, from my sort of personal upbringing, my background, and I know, for our staffs it is, and some of that is self-selecting, right? But I think that it should be a priority as we elect people and we hire people, that we ask those hard questions and we get people in positions of power who are going to make a difference. I mean, that's the way that we continue to turn the dial, is having people in those positions of power who are going to make this a priority. And then I think one step removed from that is those of us who are in those positions of power, using them, not being too busy, which we all are, but trying to really use them strategically to make things happen. And we all are in different roles, and we all have to be careful of different relationships and things. I think those of us, especially as elected officials, I think we have the obligation to be the most outspoken about it. Department heads too, but I have the good fortune to have 4 years, and I'm not reporting to a specific boss. I think that it's my responsibility to take this on and to push it forward and to help encourage other people, but to not rely on people who do have to report to somebody else to ask the hard questions and take the hard steps. So, that being said, I also think, and I'm not casting any dispersions or throwing stones, I do think that having the county council do sort of a call to action to all of the departments countywide, I think would be a great step to show that support and to show, I know it's important to our county council members, to show how important that is and really ask each department, kind of like the Superior Court Judges Association did to us, what steps might you take in the coming year? Sit down as a department or as a smaller group and identify 2 things that you can tangibly do in the next year in a meaningful way, and then report back to us and tell us about the great things that you're doing. I think that could be a really phenomenal way to get people excited and to help move the dial and make change.
Madam Chair, is there room for a follow-up? Time for a follow-up?
Yes, sure. Go ahead.
Thank you. So, Judge, on that level, I have 2 questions with that. One, it's not your job necessarily to impact people laterally. That is, if you wanted to do that and had time, that would be great. But because that's not the case, I mean, we're discussing on other levels, on a number of levels, the idea of a citizens board of kind of oversight on this level, where some of those sort of stones might be thrown back in the pond and say, hey, county council, consider these other ideas, or consider a different lens over the work that you do. But I guess maybe that's more of a point than a question. In there, though, I just wonder who does that? Is that the citizens that have to request that of their elected positions? Is there somebody? We have an opportunity, I think, right now with some new county council members to kind of refresh that mandate or make that request again. But that's lost in cyclical government, I think. So what's the throttle and what's the brake in San Juan County for that?
Well, I do think that citizen groups can and should encourage, if not demand, county council, to take tangible steps forward. And you mentioned some kind of an advisory, maybe I'm using the wrong term, but some kind of an advisory group. But there is the Law and Justice Council that I mentioned, and I know Linnea has raised this, I think, before, maybe just sharing information. And that's not advisory, so to speak, in the sense that that the group approves or disapproves of things, but it's a standing committee council that's required by statute. It has all the fundamental players who impact the justice system, but not just the judicial branch. So it includes the elected prosecutor, it includes the elected sheriff, it includes a member of the county council, and then the elected clerk, both judges, juvenile court, probation. So it has a lot of those players involved. And I do think it's my job, or at least my duty to some degree, to help encourage within the branch. And then where we touch, the prosecutor and the sheriff in terms of our joint work, I definitely encourage. We all are cognizant of separation of powers, and we all try and really respect the different roles and responsibilities that we each have. But the Law and Justice Council is a great place to encourage those conversations, and that's what Linnea and I have been doing since I think it was late summer or early fall when we started let's have a standing conversation on race issues. What else do we need to be doing? What other data can we be gathering? And then that's also actually what led to having an implicit bias training for staff, because we talked about, well, I don't know what trainings are your staff able to do, in the PA's office, or so that was one of the things that came out of that council meeting. Sorry, Linnea, I've been jabbering. You
That's great.
Do you want to add anything?
Did you want to add anything, or?
To Kyle's follow-up question, no, but maybe to his first question, it did. I would be remiss in touching on the fact that two things I'm really thinking about in terms of hiring practices. I pride myself on our hiring. We're very creative here. I don't know if that surprises people or not. We usually include role plays and activities. It's not ever just, I'm going to ask you some questions and you're going to respond, but we always include an activity to see how people handle some stress, handle customer service. And the other part too is that every staff who comes to work for juvenile court is going to be asked to describe growth mindset and to tell me about growth mindset, because that is really going to tell us a lot about is we have to be teachable. If we can't be teachable, then we can't have this commitment to being a learning organization. And that's so foundational to our culture here. And then the last thing I'll say is the part that I'm really growing on is recognizing unpaid internships and how that has historically ensured that white people like myself has been able to get ahead. I didn't have a grandma at home that I had to support. I was fine living in my truck and just doing unpaid internships to gain experience. Not everyone can do that. And so I'm really leaning into how do I create more opportunities for people to gain experience in a meaningful way and be able to connect with upper leadership and still be able to make a living or live as well.
And that is something I think both of those things, obviously mentoring is huge, but having some tools to help people feel comfortable in their hiring practices of not just diversity and inclusion being a priority, which I think it should be, but also how do we put sort of extra value on some of these characteristics and the growth mindset, which is amazing the way Linnea does it, but how do we do that? So actually in the Racial Justice Consortium, that's one of the things I'm asking for as a takeaway, to have some guidance for clerks and court staff. What are some tangible guidance to help us hire the right people and to really put a focus on diversity and inclusion? And I think at the county level, that could be really helpful. And I have never asked that question of HR, so maybe it already exists, but some real guidance and coaching about how to do that in a meaningful and an appropriate way.
Wow.
Excellent. Kevin or Sharon, do one of you have a question?
I do. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay, wonderful. I want to preface this. So Linnea and Judge Loring, I already knew you were both amazing and had just incredible respect and appreciation for you. Seeing the two of you work together and hearing this presentation gives me real hope and faith in our, not just our judicial system, but our county government as a whole. And I just want to thank you both. You guys are on fire. Everything you're talking about is incredible. I want to dive into something Kyle started to touch upon. And part of my preface should be, if everybody in county government were you guys, I don't think we'd be having this discussion, frankly. But there is a very thoughtful conversation about a citizens oversight committee, and actually oversight, and not just over the sheriff's department like what's been discussed in the past, but over the entire law and justice system. So the courts, the prosecuting attorney, the public defenders and such, but in the sheriff's department as well. And a lot of what you're doing, I could see being really supported by that group. And a lot of the things you're doing would be ideas that they would come up with and then have that aha moment where they go, oh, well, they're already doing it. But I really would like your honest opinion on kind of what that, what you think about that. And I'm talking truly oversight, not just a citizens advisory committee. And I will get on my soapbox for a second and say, I'm really tired of how many committees we have that are advisory and nothing comes of them. They come up with great recommendations, and the county council or whomever the other, department head or elected official is, looks at those and says, thanks for sharing, and nothing happens. And so what's been discussed is the idea of truly an oversight committee. And we're really trying to think about what that oversight would look like, how it could be positive and really supportive of your work, but also recognizing that the two of you aren't going to be there forever. And the charter is our constitution. And at a minimum, what we do, if it passes by the vote of the people, will be in place for 10 years at a minimum, and more likely much longer because it's harder to overturn. And so with that in mind, I start thinking, even with the wonderful job you're doing, oversight, true oversight is a good thing. So the two questions I have is, one, what do you think of that? And two, could you help us think about what that oversight would look like? Because we have to write this up and we have to get very specific in details. And I'm not sure what that oversight would look like, but I want it to have teeth.
Can I pile on a related question to that? That's very, very related.
Yeah, sure, because mine wasn't long-winded enough.
Right? No. It more exemplifies why we're having a conversation about this. It's an example of what, and I've discussed it with Linnea offline already, and we have, as a committee, have discussed it quite a bit, quite publicly, because these meetings are recorded. Sharon, if you'll allow me to ask my example related question to follow on from what Kevin just raised, and that is what we have realized, what we have learned was passed last year in the way of that sort of inclusive and safe and inclusive community resolution that was passed by the council last June, resolution number 31, 2020. And as we've begun to sort of scratch at the surface to find out what has the county manager done with that resolution that put forward some important values-based principles, didn't have a lot in the way of, had nothing in the way of actions that were being, the council was suggesting be undertaken by county government in any way, and really hasn't even been kickstarted in terms of any action being taken on it. So we're kind of scratching our heads as a committee going, that's a little concerning if a resolution was passed last year and we're not getting the impression that much of anything at all is being done on it, or there's even the bandwidth necessarily, never mind any kind of budgetary allocation for training or whatnot. But so that's, I think, and the feeling amongst ourselves is that's not good enough. It's not good enough for the future because there are longstanding issues. And I think there's enough feeling in this county among residents who've elected us that it's not good enough and we can do better. And last year was just the heightened reality of that blown up in all of our faces. And so that's why, what Kevin talked about in terms of something that's that can be built structurally into the charter, and how could that potentially work?
Thank you. Well, I think one thing that's really lucky about being in juvenile court, not necessarily in some of our other programs under our umbrella, but definitely every aspect of juvenile court, we're going to have to answer to the judge at some point. And the judge is going to review our decision making and give us a thumbs up or thumbs down. And so I have a lot of oversight, and my team has a ton of oversight. They need to prepare written documents, and they need to be ready to answer the why. And there is nothing that I or my team will do that we are not prepared to answer that question. And so I think we're unique in the sense that we're used to people asking us, why did you do that? Why did you decide to do that? Why didn't you do this instead? And our staff are excellent about not personalizing that and being ready to answer those questions. And so I think oversight is really healthy. I think there are ways that could possibly happen where decisions can be reviewed. I have no idea what that would look like in terms of oversight for the court that isn't the judge, but I do know that oversight is a healthy part of the process. And if we all know upfront that we're going to be asked on how we made our decisions, then maybe we'll think more closely about how we're making those decisions. And you're right, Commissioner Ranker, it is not, we're not going to be here. So everything that I'm trying to put into place is not based on me and my personality. I'm trying to ensure that that legacy piece is established. So, you know, if I kick it tonight, hopefully there's a path that's going to carry this work forward that isn't based on the lady in the chair, that there's, it doesn't matter if this person that follows me is as passionate as I am or not, there'll be a path forward that's committed to these things.
This is difficult, and I hope you forgive my informality, Kevin, that I'm referring to you as Kevin instead of Commissioner. But
I was gonna say, please call me Kevin. I
don't know. Lenea's not good at that. Ask Judge Loring.
Well, that's why I call her Judge Loring. I'm the same way, but
I just can't do it.
so I appreciate, Kevin's statement that, advisory committees without having teeth, even though I know and I see people put a lot of effort and energy into the recommendations that they make, there isn't a guarantee that those recommendations are going to be fulfilled or accepted. So I can understand the frustration with that. I think this is a little bit of a tricky area for me because it gets a little bit closer into, not legislative issues, but what's my opinion on what might or might not be legal or doable. So I'm not going to go there. But I think, I don't know, I could envision some kind of oversight about policies and procedures. So, having oversight about different aspects of the court's procedures or juvenile courts or other departments' procedures in terms of what kinds of trainings do staff undergo, what are the obligations for frequency of trainings, how do you build in barriers against having unconscious racism and implicit bias take effect. And we all have to make really thoughtful and conscious decisions about how we're going, especially those of us who are making decisions about how we're going to do that to decrease the chance that our implicit biases are going to rise to the surface. So, and those are just kind of two examples, but I could see oversight for processes and even forms and what are user-friendly forms and how are we reaching people, what kinds of tools, for example, do we have for unrepresented people and what kinds of structure should be in place? I could see oversight on those kinds of things. I don't know, and it would make me uncomfortable to think of oversight in terms of here's the decision you made, you tell us why you did it, and then we're going to tell you if we think it was right or wrong. I mean, I think there are both practical issues. I can't talk about decisions I make, for example, so there's that part, but people can observe and they should observe and then hold us accountable, absolutely. But also there's these challenging constitutional, issues about separation of powers, and of course, then the prosecutor's office has prosecutorial discretion, and until there were major changes to that is our law. There is prosecutorial discretion. So I know that you know these things, but I just think that some of those foundational principles make a big level oversight challenging. But absolutely, as to procedures and policies and the things that are so important to people on the ground, I think there definitely could be oversight as to some of those things. Now, I don't know if that would be advisory or really have teeth. I don't know what the teeth would be, but I would welcome, feedback on all of those kinds of procedural things.
Madam Chair, if I can have a follow-up?
Yes. Go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, I want to underscore my preface from my first statement, which is you two are amazing. I love that you are both in the positions that you are. I think that you make our community and our state much better. So thank you. The oversight, I think, will need to be, and this is, I'm thinking out loud here, will need to obviously be different per department. There's discussions with the sheriff's department where the sheriff may, luckily we haven't had this, well, we've had a few actually in the past, but not very many at all, situations where a deputy has done something that could be perceived in a negative light in some of these discussions. When those things happen, I could see oversight with the sheriff's department being more intrusive is too strong of a word, or not the right word I'm looking for, but I don't know what to say. So it would be more engaged in really looking into why they did what they did, how they did it. You are correct. Statutorily, actually, there's total separation with the courts, as you're very aware. But there's also, I would question the oversight being the same with, like the example you brought up, reviewing a decision you make. There could be questions there, but ultimately we need to elect good people and get out of their way. And I think we've elected a great judge, so let's get out of your way and let you make great decisions. You also obviously have discrepancy as does the sheriff, as does the prosecuting attorney. And it's where that discrepancy can go sideways can be a concern too. The one thing I will raise is the Law and Justice Council. I was actually on it many years ago. It doesn't include nor want to include really, sorry, any engagement from the public. It's the people, the officials within the law and justice community within our county government who serve on that. And so I would like to see a citizens body that has as much weight as that body, that's truly made up of citizens, and not so they can scream and yell and get the way our county residents get sometimes, but so they could get to know you and Randy and the sheriff and others and understand where you're coming from, but more importantly, understand professionally what the job is and why decisions are being made. There's sometimes a sheriff may do something that's totally from the outside looks inappropriate, and when you start to look deeply into what's going on, it's more of a gray area. And so I think there's a real benefit there for the citizens learning and being able to be a citizen's voice in that conversation. But I do think there needs to be oversight, because you won't be there for forever. You and Kyle are going to take your dog and go somewhere. I don't know.
No.
Well, thank you, Kevin, for your kind words and for the ideas. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry, that wasn't even a question. That was just a babbling on again. But
Sharon, would you like to, thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Kevin. And I think he speaks, I'm going to say he speaks on behalf of all of us for how much we value and appreciate what you do, and how inspired we are by what you've shared with us today. Sharon, did you have a question or two you'd like to put to these guys?
Not really a question, but I just kind of wanted to echo some of the sentiments that we really want to see what we can incorporate into the charter that is already being done in some aspects, like in the Superior Court, the Juvenile Court, and what is missing, what that would really be beneficial to have in the charter that isn't already. And this is really a big opportunity to do that. So, just any advice from you on what would you really like to see in the charter along these lines? Because I know we need something with teeth. Just having a nice vision statement doesn't really impact anything. We need some teeth, and I think that will actually interest more people in the county to get involved.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, obviously, you all know this, so I don't mean to suggest otherwise. Funding drives so much of everything. And there are certain things that we have statutes that require different things. Like, for example, we're required to have a law library, which is interesting, and it's a great resource, and it can help, I think, especially unrepresented people sometimes, but it's something that we're required to do by statute. So I think there are things like that you could think about, that we or others could help think about, that it might make sense to say, you know what, to have our court be a functioning, meaningfully accessible court system, we have to have certain things like this. And for me, one of those might be the courthouse facilitator. It's limited in funding to a 0.2 FTE, so 1 day a week, which maybe is actually enough. It's hard to say. It's kind of a moving target about what the demand for that is, but it's people who can't afford to have attorneys, which is a lot of people, specifically regarding family law issues, and they can make appointments to get advice and to help navigate the pretty complicated system of forms that are developed at the statewide level. So that's just one idea. That's not a position that's required by statute. There's a court rule that gives that authority and says it's not the unauthorized practice of law. So there's some structure, but that's just one idea off the top of my head. That could be something that we're going to say, this is really important for people to meaningfully access justice, and we kind of want to bake it into our system to say that's going to be part of our court system. Are there other things like that, Linnea, that come to mind?
I think the main thing for me is just from the big like hawk view, right? Looking down on all of this land and water that we're trying to cover, is the things that make it where I'm able to move things forward is when I have a structure, like, the King County equity tool, and then moving into the Race and Equity Justice Initiative that came forward in 2015 and started putting out tools and resources to utilize, so that if we're going to move something forward, we have something that's been tested, that we know that we're not going to do more damage or hurt people with our ideas, because that's another big part of it, is that when we try something new, we have to make sure that whatever we're bringing on board doesn't cause more harm. And so I'm constantly looking for those tools and that structure that exists, that we could make micro transitions to make it fit for San Juan. But we also have a pretty clear idea, has been tested well, isn't going to cause more harm, and is going to keep us moving forward. Because without a goal, or without a target, or without a structure, it's not going to move forward.
Mhm. Mhm.
Well, echoing that, Linnea, though, I mean, that's something that I feel like could kind of be baked in, so to speak, some kind of commitment that at the county level, every new legislation or policy, perhaps, that there would be an obligation to consider that through a race equity lens, and make a determination: do we think this is going to have a positive impact, negative impact, or neutral impact on race equity issues? And the Superior Court judges, our legislative committee, which I know Linnea is part of the legislative committee as well, they've made a commitment that every new bill that they're asked to weigh in on, they're going to make that calculation: is this positive, negative, or neutral from a race equity perspective? Maybe something like that. I really think that education, I mean, I know we all, in our different disciplines, we have different education requirements, but maybe San Juan County says we are going to commit and require that there be X number of hours for everyone on race equity and inclusion topics per year. That just such, because it's a constant learning. We can all say, oh, I did a webinar this year. Well, it's a constant learning, to be constantly thinking about and re-identifying in ourselves what our knowledge and biases are.
Wow.
Can I ask a question, if my committee members will allow me?
Yeah, please.
I'm curious to know, and what you just talked about is really interesting, Judge, because it's the notion of just it's like an analytical tool, an analytical lens that could be a requirement in its application on an ordinance, for example, or even a resolution for that matter, that would be binding, and there would need to be instruction on how to utilize that tool. And that concept makes a lot of sense to me, given some of my other professional work. But and that's a very interesting idea. A question I have to you, though, going back to that issue of that resolution: how binding is that resolution on your office at all? I mean, what does that resolution mean to you? What triggers the county to bring you to the table and say, okay, we realize that your office takes race and equity issues seriously, and we understand that you've been doing some training in this of your own staff, et cetera, and you're tapping into things going on at the state level. Come to the table and talk to us as a as a county government about how we can infuse this resolution. I mean, is that even in the realm of the possible, or?
Well, I would welcome council or anyone at the countywide level to say, how might you address this in your work, judge or court system, and ask every department to say, hey, at the end of the year, could you please report back on what 1 or 2 or 3 efforts you made to further this resolution? Kevin, I see that you're leaving. It was nice to see you.
I'm going to wait a second because I want to
Okay.
hear what you're saying, and then I have a follow-up.
So I welcome that. Now, the question about, is it enforceable? I don't know the answer to that, but I think that if council asked every department to do it and then said at the end of the year, we'd love to have a sort of celebration of all the different efforts and we want to hear a report out, I absolutely think people would do it. And even if it wasn't technically binding, and I don't know if it is, I think people would be shamed into doing it if nothing else. I just think it's the right thing to do. So I don't know, Linnea, what you think about that.
I totally agree. Yeah, I think that if we were invited to the table or were asked to produce something, department heads would rise to that occasion and would absolutely do it. And yeah, but we definitely need the structure, and having a lens to look through as decisions are being made. I had this wonderful opportunity to work with the leadership team at Orcas School District when we were changing the way that we handle truancy. And so in 2017 or 2016, we spent 9 months together working through how are we going to create an early response system to make sure that it was trauma informed and equity informed. And that is a perfect example of how we could really look at launching a new process, multiple systems, 2 institutions coming together to really look through a similar lens and create an amazing product. And I don't think it's super hard. I think if we have those structural pieces, people will commit to it.
But I totally agree, Linnea. I think that there needs to be some formal call. I mean, I think that we all kind of knew the resolution was happening. Like, I remembered hearing about it, but I don't usually get to go and just listen to council meetings. And so I think having the specific request or call to action is really important to actually make it happen.
It is. And that's that structural piece. We have to have the structure that says, we're all going to move forward. We're going to do these things. Here are some resources that may assist you, and here's the target we're all trying to reach, like Judge Loring's example of we're going to pick 2 deliverables, or we're going to pick 2 things that have measurable change throughout the year.
Excellent. Okay, Kyle, you had one more question, then we should probably wrap up.
Sure. Good point. I plan to ask this question of Mr. Wolf. I'm not sure when we're going to hear from HR, but this seems like this conversation is a reasonable place from where to sort of pursue some of this. But I'm not sure. I don't know how many people are in that department, frankly, and what their impression of their task or their service window to the county should be. So I think it should come from all avenues. That it is, the content of the resolution and the conversation so far. Before we move on, I just wanted to acknowledge the other 3 people on this call are staff members from your department. That's just another thank you to all of you who are there but not quite there. Nobody's done that either, so that also demonstrates the connectedness of your office and the commitment and kudos. We should take snapshots and somehow put everything through a filter of, oh, good.
Okay, I got a phone. I'll take a snapshot right here. Okay,
okay,
wave everybody. Got you guys.
Anyway, thanks to all of them also for the work that all of you do, and thanks for coming to spend time with us today. It's very appreciated.
Would you like me to send you the PowerPoint, or was just seeing it enough? What would you like me to do for follow-up here?
If you could please send it on. What we're doing, and if you have no objections to this, is we would post it to our CRC website. and then the public can take a look at it. And I've already been asked by one other commissioner who couldn't make it, who was interested to hear how the conversation went. So we can report back to our fuller commission as well this week.
I just wanted to be sure you saw Jane Severin, his court administrator, did put a comment in the chat. Can you all see that, just so you can take
Yeah,
note of
just
it?
finished reading it. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
good,
see
good.
it.
She just
Okay.
wanted to share her 2 cents, which I really appreciate. So, you know, Jane is having to always administer everything that happens and comes down the pike. So I think her her feedback is really helpful too.
Yeah.
If we come up, we're going to deliberate, I'm sure, and we talk a bunch in between. If we have questions or follow-ups, who would be best to put those through, and are you willing to come back if that's warranted?
Oh, sure. I'll speak for me. I won't speak for Linnea, but I'm happy to come back. And probably, I think that Jane's already been emailing with Linnea. So if you sent questions to Linnea, she and I would talk together. She would forward them on to me.
Okay.
Sure. One last question from myself, and that is district court. Should we be speaking to them separately? Is that wise?
I certainly would. I mean, we can't speak for them. I will say we didn't really highlight this, but we have really developed, especially in the last 2, 3, 4 years, a culture of collaboration where we're really working together and sharing resources. And, you know, we're all kind of short-staffed, and so working together to accomplish joint goals. So I can say that, but we can't speak for them. So I think hearing, and their cases are a little bit different. They're even kind of serving a different niche in the community. And so hearing from them the issues facing their court, I think would also be important.
Excellent, excellent. And it didn't go unnoticed that you talked about not having security, court security, and you also talked about some other funding gaps. And I'm assuming that funding is coming from the county partially or fully, or just
almost all county. We have some grant funding, and Linnea has more grant funding. I mean, we could do, you know, a whole conversation about funding, but mostly it's all coming locally. My salary is paid half by the state and half by the county, which is kind of unique. But that's the main state component. We get some reimbursement for interpreters. We get some other limited reimbursements, and then there's the different grant funding, which I will never speak for Linnea about that, but mostly local.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent.
We have a lot of definitely many pots of grant funding. A lot of those pots are pretty small. So we get really creative. And the other thing too that I think about is I think the fines and fees has really just highlighted the fact that quality law and justice can be expensive, and charging people in the system is not an appropriate place to come up with your budget shortfalls.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think that fundamentally people used to think it was like a fee for service, you know, that you had to pay for having committed the crime. And I think thankfully it's really changed how we view that no, it's a service that the community has to provide, and we shouldn't be asking someone who's now served their sentence to be paying back the cost of that.
That thought went totally through my mind, and I was maybe I'll have an offline conversation with you about that. But there's obviously a financial shortfall that, you know, that is expensive by serving in the manner that you do. So, so with that, I just want to say again, as Kevin reinforced, and I think we all feel, thank you so much for your time and your service. Really, really appreciate and respect it.
Thank you. Thanks for all the work that you're doing. You guys are doing great work, and thanks for all the effort that you're putting into this. So
absolutely.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you to our staff.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks to our staff for watching and being here. So yeah, take good care. Have a nice evening.
All right. Thank you.
You too.
You guys too. Okay. Excellent. Okay, you guys. Well, it looks like we are just a few minutes away from wrapping up. And it says my mouse battery is very low, so hopefully it doesn't die. Anyway, that was helpful, eh? Did you guys get a lot out of that?
Yeah, it's really good to know that we do have this mindful culture existing in the county and in a place where it's really important in the county. You know, particularly important in the county when it comes to justice.
Yeah.
We have some dynamite, employees and people in. I mean, I've heard that over and over and over again, and yet, where is the fall down? How come that energy doesn't shine through in the ways that? Is it funding? I mean, maybe both of you don't agree, but this is and kudos to them for focusing on their department. That's how it should be. But
Yeah, yeah.
you don't
yeah.
hear about it. And just watching and hearing from people, it really should be, as a citizen of the world, it should be required reading, or you should
Yeah.
have to sort of see this presentation and appreciate for a moment who the people are that you, it's not just whose picture is in the voter pamphlet. It's the power that that group of women, you know, put together, and the way they take care of the citizens on sort of on the other side. It's amazing.
Yeah, you know, for me on a more I don't know, a cynical side, I would say that, you know, so many people, I would say that by the vast majority of people just aren't prepared to spend the time to think about, you
No.
know, what services government delivers, the quality of those services, unless and until they're not served by them, you know. And I'll make just you know, massive comparison between, you know, Canada and the United States in this, but Canada is not a country that's founded on disliking your government and any service it provides. On the contrary, you know, it's a country where the vast majority of people understand that they pay a lot of tax because they get a lot of service from government at all different levels of government. And not that everybody's happy about paying it, but you know, you expect a certain level of service from your government because you pay taxes for it. And so it's a very different ethos here around that. And in civics, I mean, I don't get the sense that young people are taught to be public servants because it has value. You know, I mean, frankly speaking, living here, you kind of see people don't actually really value the services that government provides. And so when, you know, what do you even care about the voters pamphlet, right? You know,
You have to motivate people to vote. You really do. You have to,
seriously. I mean, it's not that, like, you take it to municipal elections in Canada and voter turnout is extremely poor, but the higher the levels you go in government, provincial to federal, it gets, you know, people get more interested. But anyway, just, you know, it's disheartening. But I mean, I think that's kind of why we've all put our stakes in the game and go, we care, we're interested, let's make everybody else interested, you know, because it is important, you know. And I think we can, you know, at least by having conversations locally about what we're learning and what we're hearing, perhaps can generate some, you know, cultivate some interest even just among our you know, our friends and family, et cetera, in the next few months, you know, because it is important.
I don't want to I'm going to keep on the schedule here, but this was a great thing that happened this week. Both you, Sharon, and Liz challenged me a little bit on thinking about, you know, spending money, or thinking, you know, I'm very aware, like people have already talked about, whatever we do here is going to have to pass the sniff test and be, you know, be voted on, and, you know, passed by a majority. And when I think about how to word it or which pieces to bite off, I'm maybe overly aware or overly concerned about that piece. But there is that gap between education and what we just said, and how deep we get to dig on some of this stuff, and how we specifically word it so that it's palatable, or sufficiently palatable, unfortunately. So, I mean, I get it, that's democracy, but I appreciate being challenged on that too, because it's an opportunity to be really out of the box. And that's, I think a lot of this, people think of this as work mostly because it requires that deep thought and that preparation, so that it's really so it's bulletproof when it gets to the place it needs to be.
Right. And I can't, you guys perhaps know better than I how the appetite in this county for paying more taxes for things, and my sense is pretty low. And so and that's, I guess that in a way, that's kind of why I kept saying, you know, we do need to do our due diligence in terms of thinking about the financial implications of things we're going to propose, because they could be so easily shot down, you know, by skeptics who are like, well, you know, I'm not going to pay anything more for that, or what have you. So, but I remain optimistic that you make a good case for it. You know, I think things are quite possible here that are progressive and forward thinking, if we can establish a good case.
Yeah, I think more so in this county than statewide.
Right.
People, you know, we approve all kinds of bonds, and if you can make the basic case that this is going to improve your life and or the life of your community, and you know, sometimes these things are just pennies.
right,
You know,
right,
but they
exactly.
add up to something that's really
Yeah.
significant.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I'm going to exercise a Madam Role Chair for a moment here and just get us to refer back to the agenda. But I'm really pleased that we did that. You know, we may want to think about just asking the district court to speak to us for you know, a shortened version of their take. If you guys think that would be helpful, I wouldn't mind that perspective. Do you agree that could be useful?
I don't want to do it next. There's some other people I want to hear from first.
Absolutely.
but,
Right.
Maybe
Absolutely. Put it on the
third-
list, I meant.
third week of April or something. Or
Yeah,
later.
like a little further on the list. Okay.
Yeah.
It could also be that we have a phone call. One of us takes a phone call, right?
Mhm.
That's another way possibly of entertaining the idea and maybe not necessarily diving into it. You know what I mean? Just having a,
Yeah.
I really want to hear from the HR department and
yes.
just see where some of this falls.
Okay, so
Yeah,
I'm just making a
agree.
note. Do you guys, so what we were going to try to have a brief discussion around were, and we don't have any public on right now, so we may not need public comment time. But we were going to try and have some brief discussion on the written statement that Sharon shared with her Orcas Island fellow residents on racism from an Asian perspective. Then there was the issue of language on human rights, Bill of Rights being discussed by the Process Committee, and Kyle is following that a little bit with me, but separately from me too. And then Civil Service Board, Washington Civil Service Act, that was another point we were just going to speak to. I would like to suggest, you guys, and again, maybe a little further down on our list, that we do invite the woman, Kathy Obenhaus, who works with that Civil Service Board, to speak to us, but perhaps a little further down. I actually might more, well, yeah, that's not a high priority for me, frankly, but I'd certainly be fine with considering others in advance of that, if you guys are okay with that. Does that sound
Yeah.
good?
Mhm.
Yes.
Okay, so on the Orcas Islands resident statement, did you guys want to talk about that at all or not right now? I read it.
Which one?
Orcas Island resident statement on racism, racism against
Yeah.
Asian.
Yeah, I just, you know, it's so relevant because, you know, like the statement that Nancy Wong made in that is that, you know, the Asian American population are like, they're like the invisible people, because it seems like they're considered like almost white, and they're not. I'm sorry, my answering machine is going off.
Yeah, yeah.
But if you know what happened last week in with the murders of Asian Americans, mostly women in Georgia, and then you start reading some of the articles that are going over the history of racism against Chinese Americans and Asian Americans in general, because Americans generally can't tell the difference between a Chinese person or a Korean person. You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah, yeah.
everybody's getting, I mean, Chinese people started getting blamed for the pandemic, and that, you know, but the history of racism goes way back, and I knew about that just because I know Nancy and Robert, and I've heard their storytelling over several years that recount the history of their families coming to the United States. You know, and their family, I think both of their family, but Nancy's family has been there at least a couple more generations than mine has. You know, and I mean, it's terrible, the racism and all of the different horrific acts that go along with that have impacted Asian Americans, and we don't hear about it.
Right.
And so this Saturday, there's going to be across the nation, there are going to be protests against racism against Asian Americans. And so it's very, very current. It's very relevant.
Sure. I agree, and I appreciated the statement, and I think we need to kind of record it, so to speak, in terms of our materials that we've received, and I think it's a very important perspective to have included, and I imagine that there are many other islanders who would feel it's very real as well, including ones on Lopez, perhaps on San Juan as well, and others. The other thing I wanted to raise, and Kyle, this relates a bit to something that you've put on our list, and that is really the issue. Instead of First Nations or Indigenous persons racism, it's also issues of inclusion of them. But the issues of Indigenous racism are even more structurally systemic in this country and not talked about. And I'm learning, I'm literally real time, about how problematic this is just in our county. And talk about invisible. I mean, how many people here are half Indigenous and half white or what have you that we don't even know of because they won't even talk about it. And so what your piece, what was shared with you, and I'm please extend, at least on my behalf, if please let them know a thank you. And I think probably Kyle would second me in that, to say thank you to your dear friends for sharing that piece and sharing that perspective. Yeah, let them know it's received and appreciated. And I think it says to me, it's really important that our group be broad in its recognition of racism and discrimination that multiple segments of our population in this county experience. And I think it's important that we make an effort to hear from different views about that and take on diverse perspectives in terms of what are we aiming for as a sort of a justice and equity committee that can make an effort to do better through some kind of structural, inclusion in this charter. So that's my takeaway.
I just want to say that, San Juan County, we're probably, I don't know, maybe this is too much of a leap and it's unsubstantiated, but just from the few people that I've talked to about this, they have not experienced racism in San Juan County. These friends of mine, Nancy and Robert and Denise that I spoke to, they feel safe here. They feel at home here. And that's really significant to me, because I've told you, when I moved here from New York City, I was like, is there a problem here? It's very white,
Yeah.
So, but you never know when something, but I do know that also one other friend of mine, her kids experienced some racism in the school, in the Orcas public schools. And these things are going to come up here and there, if not now, maybe a year or 2 or 3 from now, from somewhere. And we want to be ready to deal with it if and when it does come up here.
And it's, absolutely. And it's, from my perspective, it's not just racism, it's also sexism, it's also anti-LGBTQ, et cetera. And I think this is why I'm saying we need to have a broad perspective, in my view, and hear from multiple voices, because just the other day, I had a lengthy conversation with someone who has experienced, witnessed, observed intensive racial discrimination against First Nations people. So I think we've all the more reason why we need to talk to many and find creative ways to do that. Anyway, Kyle, did you want to add something on that?
Only that this informs the question that I have for both of you, kind of around. So we talked about kind of crosstalk with other committees, and process is working on, as I mentioned, preamble and soon on Bill of Rights. I had some pretty strong feelings for the group. I'm the only one that crosses over. And so when I talked to them, Bob O'Connell is the chair and would like to have the preamble sort of wrapped up this next time. And there's some great language in it. And I think, there's some agreement that shorter and concise is better. But there's a fundamental argument there, and then I wanted your feedback on this, and it weighs into just what you both said. So, do you try and be inclusive and almost draw attention to the scale of some of the problem, and even the fact that it exists locally, by sort of I wanted to read you just part of this. So one of the versions of the preamble is, it is our intent that all persons residing or otherwise found in our county shall be equal under the law and shall be afforded the equal protection of those laws, regardless of race, color, age, gender identification, and so on. One of the points after that was, well, is it more complex or worse to leave someone out, leave a group out in your clause, or is it better to be less, my word, not their word, but kind of more generic up front and just say all people in the county, whether it's residents or visitors, and not create any discrepancy. And I can see both sides, but I think that, and maybe some of this will be addressed more poignantly in the Bill of Rights, but I'm struggling with that, because I think that to your points and into the reason we're sitting on this committee at all, people may feel safer here, and some people may not have had the depth of, or the number of experiences that, someone in Seattle does. Nevertheless, the problem is no different here. It's potentially more whitewashed, I think.
Oh,
here.
absolutely. Mhm.
So do you call attention very specifically to every layer of it that you want to address, or do you make it, or do you not intentionally not call attention to specific groups, and just say, if you're human or you're.
It's a good question, because I mean, my feeling just from events that I've held is that people of color in this community don't necessarily want to show up and be kind of highlighted. You know what I mean?
Right.
I'm not sure about that. That's just kind of a theory I have based on events that I've held. But just let me finish.
Yeah.
Quickly, just to say that I think it's not necessary to list every group, really. It's, to be a little bit less specific, but to say, regardless of what, gender, sexual preference, sexual identification, gender identification, ethnicity, race, if you want to even call it race. Race isn't even really a thing, but we think it is. But just, whatever, just how can we just say this in the most clear way to say no discrimination, period?
Yeah. So Sharon, I would agree with you completely, and I think it's highly inappropriate for a bunch of white people sitting on a commission to decide who should be mentioned specifically. And I think the best course of action is to be consistent with the way in which non-discrimination is referenced in many other laws, many other charters, including charters that I shared the language with you that the MRSC gave that showed the non-discrimination clauses and how the references are made there. Because I think you need a broadly inclusive expression of non-discrimination that needs to be upheld, and then allow perhaps what we talk about in another part of the charter to perhaps open that, or not open up, but perhaps peel that back a little bit or get more specific about it. But even on that, I'm not entirely sure, not entirely convinced. I think we might want to talk more about equal access to justice and treatment under the law. And then what lies beneath that is what is the policy actions and the actions taken by our county government. And because there are state laws on these on anti-discrimination that do get specific and so on and so forth. So I'd feel comfortable with that, Kyle. I would use as a source of reference how non-discrimination is articulated in those other county charters in Washington State. The other point I wanted to make, I looked a little bit into further the Human Rights Commission. I don't know if I shared with you guys the website of it in Snohomish County. I meant to. I just took a quick look at it. Well, like So the Commission of Human Rights that Snohomish County established because of what their charter required they establish in the way of a Human Rights Commission. Just to give you an example, they celebrate certain sort of International Human Rights Day. They don't even, on their calendar, they don't even acknowledge International Day of the Rights of Women. March 8th isn't even a day on their calendar. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, so my point is, you can create a commission and make of that commission what you want, right? In terms of the priorities of that commission. What are the issues that are, I'm not saying we're going to create a commission. I'm just saying we as a county need to define what those non-discrimination issues need to focus in on, and do it in a manner that allows the voices that need to be heard on that issue be heard somehow. And that isn't easy, but it's necessary in my view. Yeah.
Well, I guess on the topic, I'm sorry, I have to go here in a second, but
yeah. So do I.
If we finalize and, create a preamble, it's still going to need the eyeballs of the whole commission at some point. And, there's nothing that says we can't go back and have to rehash parts of it. So I think I'll encourage that to move forward. I'll refresh that Snohomish County stuff overnight and bring that to the conversation tomorrow. And like I said, Bill of Rights comes next. I think what I will do is, as those are presented, as we work through those, I'll bring those for work product. If we can save a place in the agenda, a short place each week, then I can just push those by, or even just show you an email and you can nod. Or I just wanted to say, I've noticed, I was going to put this in the chat, my resting commissioner face, like it's I look disgusted most of the time, and it's just deep listening. So I don't know. When we're this big now, I'm really noticing that. Is there anything else we have to cover?
No, I would only ask that you please look at the list of this table I put together of the list of speakers we're intending to have. I think we need to begin to own some of these in terms of scheduling them, and I don't quite know how we're going to do that. Because I agree, like, I don't know if Berto's coming next week. I hope he is.
I will confirm that since I take over for the week.
So Kyle, that's on you. James Wolfe, like we've got Cindy Wolfe and James Wolfe. I don't know, Sharon, do you want to reach out and find out if Cindy could join us one week?
Yeah, I could do that. Do we know when James is going to join us?
No, we haven't sussed that out yet, because as Kyle said, we need to be conscious that he's been asked to speak to the operations committee as well, and we don't want to. So I don't know, do you guys want me to reach out to him on that?
That's something Catherine wanted to cover. So I would push that to Catherine.
Oh, okay. She's going to speak with him about it?
Well, she wanted to be, and this is why part of the reason she mentioned to me that she wanted this list to be updated with her, so that there was an opportunity to coordinate across, because some of these might be all commission as well.
Gotcha.
Right?
Oh,
so
right. Okay. So what do you suggest we do, Kyle?
I think, if we got next week covered and have a proposal for 2 weeks out, I'm trying to remember which group was which. We were going to talk, I think it was Process that was going to hear from a couple of lawyers. I would love to have, what would that be? April. Does anyone, can we hire like personal attendants for ourselves to keep track of our schedules?
I know, I hear you.
So the 5th, April 5, maybe to hear from James, unless he's otherwise going to be scheduled, and then in that place, maybe maybe Kathy, and save. I'm inclined to want to hear from some of the First Nation folks, but I think that's going to complicate the drive right now. I'd like to get some more traction on this topic.
Well,
I don't know how you feel, but
yes.
If James can't join us on the 5th, that's open. So
Yeah, and then Cindy maybe could be an alternate on the 5th, possibly.
If if other groups don't want to, I think there's probably some scramble to hear from her
Okay.
across the group too.
Oh, is it? Okay, okay. Right.
She seems to be one of the more approachable county, you know, she's fresh and she's pretty driven on a lot of the topics we're talking about. So
Cindy is, yeah, definitely.
yeah.
right.
So you do want me to reach out to her, right?
Well, I guess that's, I would say, I mean, yes, I want to catch her thoughts on talking to us specifically,
Good.
unless she's already going to talk to the whole group. So I think both James and Cindy and anybody county, anyone who's county staff for sure, it sounds like should go through Catherine.
Okay.
Oh,
Okay.
so I'm sorry. So you're saying Cindy should go through Catherine as well?
Yeah, not because you can't do a good job, but just because I think she's trying to schedule the other, just make sure that there aren't other groups. She wants to pose those
Right,
other
okay.
people across
Right.
the other list.
Can we just reach out to Catherine then and make sure she's kind of on top of reaching out to Cindy and to James?
Yeah, I think if we use the table that was made and just keep feeding those back with maybe a column that says, please
Okay.
invite or please schedule with anyone else who wants it. I don't know the best way
Okay.
to do it, but
Okay. Yeah, with the caveat that I mean, Sharon, do you want to share the table with her and maybe pencil in Berto for March 29 and James for April 5 question mark?
What was the last one? Pencil and Berto for March 29th and
Yeah, well,
James
actually,
for April 5.
yeah, James for April 5, but I just wonder, why wouldn't the whole commission want a presentation from James on his department? It strikes me as a pretty important department. No? I don't
If
know.
we can get a response from Catherine before the end of the week, I think we're still okay.
Okay, all right. And then, okay, and Kyle, could you reach out to Umberto and Carmen?
Yes.
Okay. And find out if they could come like the 12th or 19th of April?
Yes, I'd be happy to. And before I log out here, who's gonna report? Do we have enough put together to go to the main commission for a written report? And then who's gonna do the verbal?
Yeah,
There is one.
yeah, okay. I'm happy to give a quick report back. If we're asked to, but Kevin seemed to be wanting to default for us to look at each other's minutes. I've written to him today and I said, I don't think that's appropriate because not everybody's getting their minutes posted up quickly enough. And it's not, I think we need at least a 2 or 3 bullet point written contribution from each committee, like very, very brief, and it'll force people to be brief in terms of the issues that they're working on. That was my suggestion. And then we can read the email and we don't have to read it out, but if you've got questions, we can ask it. So because I didn't even report last week, if you want, I can just propose to do that this week, which is just put a couple bullet points in an email to the commission. Is that okay? That's what I'll do.
I thought the idea was we all digest that, and if there were questions beyond that or to clarify,
Right,
that would
right,
happen in the commission meeting. Okay.
right, right.
I'm sorry, you guys, I got a dash.
Yeah, I gotta go too. Okay, thank you for the meeting, you guys.
Thanks
And
for taking notes again, Sharon.
yeah, as always, Sharon, thank you very much. Okay, all right, we'll be in touch. I'm ending recording now. Uh-oh, where's my recording? Did it stop? Oh no, here it is. Yay. Recording just resumed because we are now, can I have a motion to adjourn, please? Fellow
So
committee.
moved.
motion to adjourn. Second.
Okay, excellent. And we are adjourning. Goodbye.
Bye.